Hey, Manna students, Mackenzie here again. I didn't like the way that I said again. Mackenzie here again. I'd like to welcome you to week 3 of our series for July called Jesus Is. Whether you're watching on the Manna Church YouTube page or the Manna Students Facebook page, or you're watching this at one of your student site groups at one of our locations physically, we are so glad that you are tuning in to discover what God has to speak to you this evening through this message. To begin tonight, I want to ask a big question, which I'm pretty sure I already know the answer to. Have you ever been lied to before? Like, lied to in a way where you couldn't even figure out what the truth is, or that we have lied before. Let's be honest, we've all probably done it at some point in our life. Whether we lied about what time we went to bed to our parents, or we lied to a friend about being sick when we weren't actually sick because we wanted to do something different than possibly hang out with them, or maybe we lied to someone or have been lied to about a haircut that wasn't the greatest, or a shirt that actually did not look cool. Sometimes we know when someone lies to us, but sometimes it can be really hard to tell when somebody's actually telling the truth. And so there are lies and there's truth, but have you noticed it's not always easy, or sometimes you can't always figure out what the truth actually is. I think a great example of, confusing lies and truth can come from, looking at social media or looking at the news through social media, through the news, through TV, all of those things. We consume so much content, and often that content contradicts itself and doesn't actually line up. So the internet, thankfully, has so much information for us, but it also can be really hard to sift through to figure out what's the truth and what's the lie. And if we're not being honest, we can sometimes unintentionally learn false truths, so we can learn lies. So it's not just with our friends, but even the internet can cause us to get really confused about what the truth actually is. For the last 2 weeks, we've been talking about who Jesus is. So far, we said Jesus is God, Jesus is Savior, but today we're going to talk about a third thing, which might actually be something that causes people to get a little bit offensive, and that is the fact that Jesus is truth. Sometimes the truth can be hard to find after sifting through all of the lies. Sometimes people debate if the truth even is the truth, and I'm sure we've been in conversations or arguments, loud conversations, talking about trying to figure out who is saying the truth. But I'm going to be honest, this happened in the Bible, and this happened, of course, in Jesus' life. That's why we're talking about it. If Jesus' truth is, if Jesus' life and who he is and what he believed is truth, then I'm sure there was many arguments that people had with Jesus, about Jesus. Like we talked about in week 1, the Pharisees and the Sadducees would do anything to undermine Jesus and what he was trying to bring as the truth. So today we're actually going to look at the story of Jesus' interaction with Pilate. So Pilate is somebody who is in the Roman government, who is over this area of people. And so in John 18:28 through 38, it's kind of long, so if you want to get out your Bible, that's awesome. John 18:28 through 38. But in this example, Jesus is about to be, or he's in the process of being sentenced to death for his crimes. And what Pilate's trying to do, the leader of the Roman government, or the leader within the Roman government in this space, is he's having a debate with Jesus about what the truth is. Pilate is trying to figure out what the heck Jesus is being accused of so he can know what Jesus is going to be sentenced for. So John 18:28, we're starting from there. It says, "Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. That's who Pilate is. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanliness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. Fair. Always want to be able to eat. So Pilate came to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man? If he were not a criminal," they replied, "why would we not have handed him over to you?" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." So the Jewish people brought Jesus to them. And they responded, "But we have no right to execute him." They objected. They took a place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Pilate then went back inside in the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked, "or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on this side of the truth listens to me." "What is the truth?" retorted Pilate. With this, he went out against the Jews gathered there and said, "I find no basis for a charge against him." So here's what's happening during this time. The religious leaders of the day, Pharisees, Sadducees, wanted Jesus dead. Like we said in week 1, Jesus was claiming to be God, and he threatened their power over the Jewish people, and that outraged the religious leaders. But they also had a problem. Legally, these religious leaders could not sentence anyone to death, and they wanted Jesus to die. They needed the Roman government to be able to do that, which is why they brought Jesus to Pilate. The religious leaders took to the Roman government, who is Pilate, but Pilate wasn't convinced Jesus had done anything worthy of death. So Pilate questions Jesus, and as he tries to figure out what he's going to sentence him with, why they're trying to get him to be killed, to be sentenced to death, they start talking about the truth. So let's dive in a little bit to what is actually happening in this passage. The first question that Pilate asks Jesus is, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He asks this because if Jesus is claiming to be a king, then there's reason to sentence Jesus to death, because the thing is the Roman government already has a king. So if Jesus is trying to claim that he's going to take that king's spot, then Pilate has a reason to sentence Jesus, because he can't have anybody taking King Herod's spot. So is Jesus a king? Well, first Jesus responds with a question. He doesn't directly answer Pilate right away. Then Jesus basically says he's kind of a king, but the fact is that his kingdom is not an earthly kingdom, which most likely confused Pilate. Pilate's confused. Basically, he just wants to know if Jesus is going to overthrow the king. Most likely, Pilate just wants to move on with his life and get over this little tidbit that's happening here. But Jesus says his goal is something very different than, trying to overthrow a Roman king. He says that he's trying to testify the truth. So Pilate responds with, "What is the truth?" There's some debate over what Pilate means. So those who analyze the Bible, theologians who try to figure out what this means, there's a little bit of a debate about what Pilate was trying to ask with this question. So whether or not he was asking seriously about what the truth is, or he was suggesting that there's no such thing as truth, or even he was talking about Jesus in the trial that was impending Jesus and death that was before him, and he was possibly suggesting that Jesus was not truly guilty, but that it didn't matter. So I'm not sure which exactly one that is, but I think it's still a good question. What is truth? It's not always easy to know what the truth is. We just talked about that. But in this case, Jesus makes it very, very clear. Jesus is truth. And he came to show the truth of himself. He came to show the world the truth. This is the claim that makes Jesus different, but this is also the claim that gets Jesus killed. Jesus made the claim that he is truth, and that claim is something that we still believe today, that truth isn't just an idea, but truth is a person. In John 14:6, Jesus answers a question from his disciples with this proclamation. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. And you may be asking, if Jesus is the truth, then what does this all mean for me? When we know the truth, when we know who Jesus is, we're set free. It sets us free from the power of sin and death, from believing lies about God, from even believing lies about ourselves. If we know that Jesus is the truth, then it sets us free from anger. It sets us free from brokenness, from selfishness, from unforgiveness, from anything that has held us captive. The fact that we can believe that Jesus is truth, that he comes to bring truth, that his life brings truth, sets us free from all of that. Jesus is the truth, and the truth sets us free. We read that in John 14:6. You see, when we trust him and what he says about us, that we are loved, that we are forgiven, that we are seen, that we are free of sin, we can face any situation, not based on our own merit, but based on who he is, what he's done for us, and who he calls us. He calls us son, and he calls us daughter, and he calls us free because of the truth of himself, because of the truth that he has to offer us. We're going to dive into this a little bit deeper through our small group discussions, through our small group questions. If you're watching this at home, we're going to include the small group questions for you in the comments or in the description below. If you are at your student site group, we are going to have a discussion about it. So enjoy those conversations, and until next week, we will see you again.